Just realised I've picked the longest day of the year to make a video about low light photography, but fortunately I've invested in one of these, so okay, I think that's good. Let's go shoot. Okay, welcome to part 3 of this beginner's guide series on photography. I'm going to use the same format as I used in part 2, whereby I'm going to use just an entry-level DSLR with the basic lens that tends to come with the camera, and again I'll be starting my shooting with the camera set to full auto mode, which is the mode that most people tend to use when they're starting out. Just as a quick side note, if you did, on my advice in part 2, invest in the 50mm f1.8, this would be a good time to attach this lens to your camera, because it does a much better job in low light than the kit lens does. So in order to illustrate the sort of results that you'll get with this setup in full auto mode, I had a wander out onto the high street here on the longest day of the year. It was about 10:30 at night. It was about as dark as it was going to get, and I just turned the camera on, hit the shutter button. The camera looked at the scene and decided it was very dark, so it needed to add in some flash. So it popped up the flash, and when I took the photo it fired the flash. Now you can see in this first image that the flashes lit up the foreground immediately in front of the camera, and the camera has kind of said, well, I'm going to use flash, so I'm going to be adding lots of light into the scene, so I can afford to darken the image down. The camera assumes that what we're taking a photo of is going to be reasonably close to the camera, so all the camera's worried about is brightly lighting up the foreground, and so it darkens down the image to compensate for all this light that we'll be adding in. So consequently we get an image that is for the most part way too dark. It's lit by the flash, which is quite a white light and gives the image quite a cold look. We're getting bright lights where the license plates on the cars and the signs are reflecting the flash back, so we've got very uneven lighting, and the image looks nothing like what we see with the human eye. Now, even though this photo looks pretty awful, if we zoom into the image we can see that it's actually reasonably sharp, and we can read the license plate on that car there. Now there's a very quick fix for this, for those of you who don't want to get too deep into the detail. We can simply turn off the camera's flash. Now if you have an entry-level DSLR, there's a good chance that just by rotating the dial away from the full auto mode, which is indicated by the green box, into the next mode along, in the case of a Canon camera, which is a sort of zigzagged arrow with a diagonal line through it, and that is the universal symbol for turning the flash off. Now don't worry if you don't have an entry-level DSLR. All cameras have, well, virtually all cameras have an option to turn off the flash. You'll usually find it in a menu somewhere, or in the case of the Sony RX100 that I'm filming this with, there's a dedicated flash button which gets us into the menu, and you've usually got at least 3 options in there. One will force the flash to fire regardless of how bright the scene is. The next one is usually an automatic mode, so if the camera thinks the flash is needed, it'll fire. And then we've usually, hopefully, also got an option to turn the flash off. So as I say, with an entry-level DSLR like this, it's nice and easy to turn the flash off. We just rotate this mode dial on the top and we're into flash off mode. So that was what I did. I then took the photo again. Now in this second image that I took with the flash turned off, we can see straight away that we're getting something that looks a lot more like we were expecting when we took the shot. The scene is evenly lit. We're no longer lighting the scene with the flash from the camera. The scene is being lit by the street lights and any other lighting that was present at that time, and we're getting straight away a much more pleasing looking shot. But some of you may have noticed that this image is not sharp, it is blurred. Now if we zoom into the image, that becomes all the more apparent. Not only can we not read the license plate of the car, but it's difficult to even make out that there is a license plate there. Now, how do we get around this? Well, the reason for the blurring is that whilst the camera was taking the photo, I moved the camera unintentionally ever so slightly. Why should that be an issue? Well, the camera knows that it's no longer using the flash, so the camera decides it needs to find another way to gather sufficient light to take the photo and for the photo to be appropriately exposed, so for it to be bright enough. And the way that the camera decides to achieve this is that the camera takes longer to take the shot. And if we move the camera even slightly whilst the camera's taking the photo, we get this blurriness in the image. So the easiest way to get around this is to just hold the camera as steady as you can. Now in this case, the camera took about half a second to take the photo, and keeping the camera perfectly still is really quite tricky for that length of time. Now the kit lens does have one advantage over some other lenses. It does have image stabilisation, so if we turn that on, it helps to compensate a bit for any slight movements in our hands when we're taking a photo in low light. But as I say, if you tuck your elbows in tightly to your body and just steady the camera as much as you can, use the viewfinder rather than the screen, so the camera has another point of contact with your body, and if we steady the camera in this way, we've got a much greater chance of getting a sharp image. Even better still, if there's something like a lamppost or a tree nearby and you can lean the camera against the tree and take the shot, again you've got a much better chance of getting a sharp image. So if you're taking shots in this mode, the flash off mode, holding the camera as steady as you can, I would advise that you take a number of shots in a row, and there's a good chance that at least one of those is going to be nice and sharp. So in the next shot, again I was in the flash off mode and I did my best to steady the camera. Not only do we have a much more pleasant looking image that's much more as we see with our own eyes, we can see that it's also a lot sharper because we've managed to keep the camera steady whilst the camera took its time overtaking the photo. And if we zoom into the image, we can see that it is a lot sharper than the previous image, that we don't have that blur problem, but we can't actually read the license plate on the car. And you can probably tell that the reason for that is that the image just looks grainy and mushy. Now, for those of you who are interested in achieving even better results than this, I'm going to take you through a method for not only taking a sharp image but also a relatively noise-free image that will bear close examination, and that you could, if you wanted to, crop a section out of without it looking too noisy and mushy and blurry. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please take a couple of seconds just to click on the like button, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to post those down below. I will respond to all polite comments, and thank you for watching.